The rain had turned to ice 3 days ago, and Vera Thornwood could no longer feel her feet. She stumbled through the darkness, one hand pressed against the swell of her belly where her daughter still kicked, weaker now, but kicking. That rhythm had become her only prayer, the only proof that she hadn't destroyed everything by running. 7 months pregnant, alone in territory that belonged to the most feared Alpha King in 3 centuries, and she was going to die in a ditch like the worthless creature her brother had named her. Keep moving, keep moving, she's still alive, keep moving. The Thornwood Packlands were 200 miles behind her. 21 days of walking, hiding, stealing scraps from farmhouse bins when the hunger became unbearable. Her wolf had gone quiet somewhere around day 15, too exhausted to do more than whimper occasionally in the back of her mind. Vera had always been small for a shifter, had always struggled to hold her form for more than a few hours, one of the many failures her brother Alexander loved to catalogue. "You're an embarrassment to our bloodline," he'd told her the night everything shattered. "A weak wolf carrying a rogue's bastard. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" She hadn't been carrying anyone's child when he'd first made that accusation. The cruelty of it still burned in her chest like swallowed glass. Alexander had stood in their father's old study, surrounded by pack elders who'd watched her grow from infancy, and he'd lied with such smooth conviction that even she had almost believed him. "The father is a spy from the Blackwood Rogues," he'd declared, his handsome face twisted with manufactured disgust. "She's been passing them information about our border patrols for months. The pregnancy is her payment." Vera had stood frozen, her mind refusing to process the words. She'd been pregnant for barely 2 months at that point. The father, a kind trader from a neutral pack, who died in a river crossing accident before she could tell him. There had been no conspiracy, no betrayal, no rogue lover, just a grieving woman carrying a child she already loved desperately. But Alexander had the council's ear. Alexander had spent years cultivating allies while she'd retreated into her grief after their parents' deaths. Alexander had the letters. Forged letters, she knew now. Correspondence supposedly in her handwriting, detailing pack movements and defensive weaknesses. She'd seen them only briefly before Alexander had snatched them away, but she'd recognized the hand of his secretary, a man whose penmanship she'd studied during the years she'd helped manage pack correspondence. "The sentence for treason is death," Elder Margot had pronounced, her rheumy eyes cold. "For you, and for the abomination you carry." Abomination. The word had cracked something in Vera's chest. She'd touched her barely rounded stomach and felt her daughter flutter in response, innocent and unknowing, and something had shifted in her. A wall she hadn't known existed crumbled, and in its place rose a ferocity that surprised even her. She'd run. Not through the front gates. Alexander's guards were waiting there. Through the old servant tunnels that their mother had shown her as a child, the ones that led to the river and the forest beyond. She'd grabbed her winter cloak, the letters she'd hidden in her hem months ago when she'd first suspected her brother's treachery, and nothing else. 21 days. 3 weeks of sleeping in hollowed logs and abandoned hunting cabins. 3 weeks of her body slowly failing while her daughter grew stronger, as if the baby was drawing life directly from her bones. Vera's ribs showed through her skin now. Her ankles had swollen so badly that she'd had to cut slits in her boots. The cough that rattled in her chest had developed a wet, ominous quality that she refused to think about. The Alpha King's territory had seemed like madness when she'd first conceived of it. Fenris Bloodmoon was a legend whispered to frighten children, the wolf who'd killed his own father to take the throne, who'd united the northern packs through sheer brutality, whose eyes were said to burn with the gold of ancient bloodlines. He took no mate, showed no mercy, and ruled with an iron authority that made other alphas bow their heads in instinctive submission. But Vera had remembered something else about the old stories, The Blood Moon Pack protected those who came to them in genuine need. It was an ancient law, older than the current king, and Fenris was said to be fanatically devoted to the old ways. It was a slim hope, a desperate one, but her daughter deserved a chance to live, even if Vera herself did not. The fortress materialized through the freezing rain like a fever dream. Massive walls of black stone rose against the iron-gray sky, torches flickering in iron brackets despite the weather. Guards patrolled the ramparts, their movements precise and disciplined. The gates were solid oak, reinforced with silver-chased iron, and they were closed against the night. Vera's legs buckled. She went down hard on the frozen ground, her knees cracking against ice, her hands barely catching her fall. The jolt sent pain shooting up her arms and into her shoulders, but it was distant now. Everything was distant. Her vision had started to tunnel, darkness creeping in at the edges. "Get up," she commanded herself. "Get up. Get up. You're so close." Her arms wouldn't obey. She managed to roll onto her side, curling instinctively around her belly, and felt her daughter kick once, twice, then fall still. "No," Vera whispered. Her voice came out as barely a rasp. "No, please. Not now, we're here." Shouts from the wall. Running footsteps. The crunch of boots on ice. Vera tried to lift her head, to call out, but her body had finally surrendered to 3 weeks of abuse. The cold seeped into her bones like a living thing, hungry and patient. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was a pair of boots stopping inches from her face. Fine leather, expensively made, not the rough footwear of common guards. And then a voice, deep and rough with something that might have been concern. "Get the healers, now." Vera let go and fell into nothing. She dreamed of fire, not the destructive kind. This was warmth that sank into frozen muscles and stiff joints, that wrapped around her like a fur blanket and whispered promises of safety. In the dream, someone held her hand. Large fingers, calloused and strong, engulfing her small palm completely. She couldn't see the person's face, but she felt their presence like a lodestone, pulling at something deep in her chest. "Rest," the presence seemed to say. "You're safe now. Rest." Her wolf, silent for so long, stirred weakly in response. Recognition flickered through the exhaustion, not of a person, but of something more fundamental, a resonance, a rightness. Then the dream shifted, and Alexander's face loomed over her, his features twisted with rage. "You think you can escape me? You think anyone will protect you from what you've done?" Vera screamed and woke, silk sheets tangled around her legs. A fire crackled in an enormous hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with tapestries. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she'd ever felt, piled with furs and cushions. For a long moment she simply lay there, her heart hammering against her ribs, trying to understand. Then her daughter kicked, strong and insistent, and Vera's hands flew to her belly with a sob of relief. "She's been active for the past 2 hours," said a voice from the shadows. "The healers say she's healthy, determined, apparently." Vera's head snapped toward the speaker, and the world tilted on its axis. He sat in a chair beside her bed, not lounging, but poised, as if he'd been waiting, watching. He was enormous, broad-shouldered and thick with muscle, his dark hair pushed back from a face that looked carved from granite. A scar bisected his left eyebrow and continued down his cheek, old and silvered. He could have been 30 or 300. There was something ageless about him, something that spoke of battles and centuries and power beyond imagining. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Dark as pitch in the firelight, fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Heat bloomed in her chest without warning, spreading outward like a struck match. Her wolf, dormant, exhausted, barely present, surged forward with such force that Vera gasped. His nostrils flared, his pupils expanded, swallowing the dark irises until only a thin ring remained, and then gold bled through, bright and burning, the color of ancient bloodlines and primal power. A sound escaped his throat, not quite a growl, not quite words, something raw and involuntary, as if torn from him against his will. Vera felt the bond wrap around her heart like a golden thread, warm and unbreakable. And terror crashed through her alongside the most profound sense of home she had ever known. Impossible, the Alpha King breathed. His hand was already reaching for her face, and she could see it trembling. Impossible. Vera couldn't breathe. The golden thread tightened around her heart, pulling her toward him with an urgency that defied every survival instinct she'd honed over 3 weeks of running. Her wolf pressed against her skin so forcefully that she felt the shift rippling just beneath the surface, something that hadn't happened since before she'd fled, since before exhaustion had driven her animal half into silence. Mate. Her wolf keened. Mate. Mate. Finally, ours. No, Vera whispered, but the word came out fractured, unconvincing even to her own ears. She pressed herself back against the headboard, her hand splaying protectively over her belly. This isn't... I can't... Fenris Bloodmoon went utterly still. His reaching hand froze inches from her face, trembling visibly, and she watched him wage some internal war that played out in the tension of his jaw. The white-knuckled grip of his other hand on the chair's armrest. The gold in his eyes pulsed, brightening and dimming like a heartbeat, and his chest heaved with breaths that seemed deliberately controlled. I'm not going to hurt you. His voice had dropped to something rough and raw, as if the words were being dragged over gravel. I would never... He stopped, swallowed hard, and slowly, so slowly she could track every increment of movement, withdrew his hand. You're safe here. Whatever you're running from, whoever sent you fleeing through my territory half dead and 7 months pregnant, they cannot touch you within these walls. The sincerity in his voice struck her like a physical blow. She'd expected many things from the Alpha King. Cold calculation, political maneuvering, perhaps even cruelty disguised as hospitality. She had not expected this. Raw vulnerability bleeding through centuries of carefully constructed armor, a man undone by a single glance at a broken woman in his bed. You feel it, she said. It wasn't a question. Like a hook behind my ribs. He pressed his fist against his chest, over his heart, pulling me toward you. I've heard the old stories, the songs about the mate bond, but I thought... A harsh laugh escaped him. I thought I was beyond such things. Centuries of searching, of wondering if my wolf was simply too damaged to recognize anyone. And then you collapse at my gates carrying another man's child, and my entire world shifts on its axis. Another man's child. The words should have been an accusation, should have carried the same disgust that had dripped from Alexander's tongue when he'd condemned her. Instead, Fenris spoke them as simple fact, with no judgment threading through the consonants. You don't care, Vera breathed. About the baby, about who her father was. Something flickered across his granite features. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. Should I? Everyone else does? The bitterness welled up before she could stop it. 3 weeks of terror and grief and desperate loneliness spilling over like a dam breaking. My own brother accused me of treason because of her. My pack, the pack I was born into, that I loved, sentenced us both to death. And you sit there telling me the bond doesn't care that I'm carrying someone else's child? Fenris leaned forward, and the firelight caught the silver of his scar, the hard planes of his face softened by something she couldn't name. The bond cares that you're mine. The word rolled out of him like a growl, possessive and absolute. It cares that my wolf has been howling since I carried you in from the cold, that every instinct I possess is screaming at me to protect you, to provide for you, to... He stopped himself, visibly wrestling for control. The child is part of you. That makes her mine to protect as well. Anyone who threatens either of you will answer to me personally. The certainty in his voice was staggering. He meant it. Every word, every implied promise. She could feel his conviction through the nascent bond, emotions bleeding across the connection like colors seeping through wet paper. Fierce protectiveness, barely leashed desire, and beneath it all, a loneliness so vast and ancient it took her breath away. He'd been alone for centuries. She could feel the weight of it pressing against her consciousness. Years upon years of empty halls and political machinations, and no one who saw past the monster to the man beneath. "You're scared," he said quietly. "Of me, of the bond, of what this means. I understand. I won't rush you." He settled back in his chair, putting physical distance between them, and something in Vera's chest loosened at the gesture. "But you should know that I have no intention of letting you go. Not now that I've found you." She should have been terrified by those words. They sounded like a threat, like a cage closing around her just as she'd escaped another. But her wolf was purring now, settling into a contentment it hadn't felt in months, and the golden thread between them hummed with warmth rather than warning. "I don't even know you," she managed. "No." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, softening the brutal lines. "But you will." Vera slept again, pulled under by exhaustion despite the chaos churning in her chest. When she surfaced, the fire had burned low and the windows showed the gray light of pre-dawn. She was disoriented for a moment, uncertain where the dream had ended and reality begun. Then she heard Alexander's voice, clear as if he stood beside her. "The sentence for treason is death. For you, and for the abomination you carry." She thrashed upward with a strangled cry, her hands flying to her belly, certain somehow that they'd found her, that the guards were coming, that her daughter was already. "Vera." Fenris's voice cut through the panic, low and steady. "Vera, you're in the Blood Moon Fortress. You're safe. No one is here but me." She couldn't stop shaking. Her breath came in harsh gasps, and tears streamed down her face before she could prevent them. The nightmare still clung to her like cobwebs, Alexander's triumphant sneer superimposed over the candlelit room. "My baby," she choked out. "Is she? I can't feel her moving." "Give her a moment." Fenris hadn't moved from his chair, she realized. He sat exactly where he'd been before, as if he'd spent the entire night watching over her. "The healer said she's healthy, strong heartbeat, good position. You've been protecting her well, despite everything." As if in response to his words, her daughter kicked hard against Vera's palm. The relief that flooded through her was so intense, it bordered on pain, and a sob escaped her throat. "There," Fenris said softly. "There she is." Vera pressed her hand harder against the movement, grounding herself in the reality of her child's survival. Slowly, her breathing began to steady. The nightmare's grip loosened, replaced by the warmth of the fire and the inexplicable comfort of the Alpha King's presence. "I keep dreaming about him," she heard herself say. "My brother. The things he said when he condemned me. Tell me." Not a demand. An invitation. Fenris's voice had gone quiet, almost gentle. "Or don't. But I'm told that speaking of nightmares sometimes steals their power." She shouldn't trust him. She'd known him for mere hours, and everything she'd heard about him suggested a monster barely contained by civilization's thin veneer. But the bond hummed between them, warm and insistent, and her wolf pressed forward with certainty she couldn't ignore. He called her an abomination. The word tasted like ash. My own brother, speaking about his niece. He didn't even... Her voice broke. "He didn't even care that he was lying. He just wanted me gone." Fenris said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his tone was conversational, almost idle. "My horse tried to bite 3 grooms this morning. He's a miserable creature, all spite and bad temper. I've had him for 40 years and he's never once shown me affection. Vera blinked at the abrupt change of subject. What? His name is Wrath. The stablemaster begs me to get rid of him every winter, claims he's a menace to the entire household. But he carried me through the northern campaign without faltering once, so I keep him in oats and warm blankets despite his personality. Fenris's lips quirked slightly. The cook made soup yesterday. Fish soup. I don't know what possessed her. I've told her a dozen times that I despise fish, but there it was, steaming away at dinner. I ate 3 bowls rather than hurt her feelings, and spent the entire evening regretting my choices. A startled laugh escaped Vera before she could stop it. The sound was rusty, unpracticed. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed at anything. Why are you telling me this? Because your breathing has steadied and your hands have stopped shaking. His eyes, dark again without their golden fire, held hers with quiet intensity. And because I want you to know that the fearsome Alpha King is, in reality, held hostage by an elderly cook and a horse with the temperament of a wet cat. Something cracked in Vera's chest, not the breaking she'd felt when Alexander condemned her. This was different. A wall she hadn't known she'd built began to crumble, loosening something tight and defensive behind her ribs. You stayed all night, she said, watching over me. You needed rest, and He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. I found I could not leave. My wolf wouldn't allow it. The admission cost him something, she could tell. Pride, perhaps, or the carefully maintained illusion of control. The Alpha King, bound to a bedside vigil by instinct he couldn't override. Thank you, she whispered. It wasn't enough. Nothing she could say would be enough to encompass what his presence had meant through the long hours of darkness, but it was all she had. Fenris inclined his head, a formal gesture that seemed almost awkward on a man of his power. Rest more if you can. The council convenes at midday, and His jaw tightened. There are matters to discuss regarding your presence here. Your protection must be formalized under the old laws before anyone thinks to challenge it. He rose from the chair, and Vera was struck again by the sheer size of him. He seemed to fill the room, his shadow stretching across the floor like a living thing. But he moved toward the door without approaching the bed, maintaining the distance he'd promised. Fenris, she called before she could stop herself. He paused, his hand on the door frame. The way he turned toward her, the barely leashed hunger in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, made her acutely aware of how thin her nightgown was, how vulnerable she must look tangled in silk and furs. The fish soup, she said. Did the cook know you hated it? The corner of his mouth lifted just slightly. She's known for 30 years. I believe it brings her joy to watch me suffer. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Vera pressed her face into the pillow to muffle the bewildered, terrified, hopeful laughter that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. The council chamber was enormous, vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, massive windows overlooking the frozen courtyard below. Vera had been carried there in a wheeled chair, her legs still too weak for walking, by guards who handled her as if she were made of spun glass. She suspected Fenris had given very specific instructions about her treatment. He sat on a throne of black stone at the head of a long table, and the counselors arrayed before him fell silent when Vera was wheeled to his side. A dozen pairs of eyes fixed on her with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, and thinly veiled hostility. "The Thornwood woman," announced a gray-bearded elder, his tone dripping with disapproval. "My king, surely this discussion would be better conducted in private. Lady Vera is to be present for all matters concerning her welfare." Fenris's voice carried no inflection, but the elder's mouth snapped shut. "She has a right to hear the council's deliberations." "With respect, sire, we know nothing about her," A stray appearing at our gates, heavy with an unknown child? The child's father was a trader from the Riverside Pack, Vera said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. He died before he knew of the pregnancy. There was no conspiracy, no rogue involvement. My brother lied. The elder's eyebrows rose. And we should simply accept your word? You should accept mine. Fenris hadn't raised his voice, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. I have recognized Lady Vera as my mate. Her child will be raised as my heir. Any further questions about their legitimacy may be directed to me personally. Silence crashed over the chamber. The counselors exchanged shocked glances, and Vera felt blood rushing to her cheeks. He'd announced it. Just like that, before the entire council, with no hesitation or qualification. My king, ventured a woman with silver-streaked hair, her tone more measured than the elders. The implications of such a claim are precisely what they appear to be. Fenris's hand found Vera's shoulder. A light touch, easily escaped if she wished, but warm through the fabric of her borrowed dress. Lady Vera and her daughter are under my protection. The old laws demand hospitality for those in genuine need. My bond demands considerably more. Both will be honored. The Thornwood Pack has sent ravens, the elder persisted, a stubborn set to his jaw. They claim the woman is a traitor, that she passed secrets to the Blackwood rogues. The Thornwood Pack can send all the ravens they wish. Gold flickered at the edges of Fenris's irises. Unless they can provide evidence more compelling than forged letters and a brother's jealousy, their claims hold no weight in this hall. The elder opened his mouth again, clearly intent on pressing the point, and Vera felt her stomach clench. She knew that look, the self-righteous certainty of men who believed themselves guardians of order. She'd seen it on Alexander's face, on the faces of the elders who'd condemned her. Although, Fenris continued, his tone shifting to something almost conversational. Now that we've established Lady Vera's status, perhaps the council would like to discuss more pressing concerns. The healer informs me she's severely malnourished. I want a diet plan prepared by tomorrow, with specific attention to foods that support pregnancy. Her chambers need additional heating. I felt a draft near the window this morning that was completely unacceptable. You want the council to discuss heating arrangements? The elder looked genuinely offended. I want the council to discuss whatever is necessary for my mate's well-being. Fenris's hand tightened slightly on Vera's shoulder. Unless you have more important matters to attend to, Lord Garrett? What followed was, without question, the strangest hour of Vera's life. The fearsome Alpha King, the wolf who'd killed his own father, who'd united the northern packs through sheer brutal force, devoted an entire council session to debating whether Vera was eating enough vegetables. The silver-haired woman produced a list of foods beneficial for pregnancy, which sparked a heated argument about the availability of fresh greens during winter. Lord Garrett, apparently abandoning his earlier hostility, suggested that the fortress's heated greenhouses could be expanded. Through it all, Fenris listened with apparent seriousness, occasionally interjecting questions about nutrition and comfort that revealed a surprising depth of research. When had he found time to learn about pregnancy requirements? He'd been at her bedside all night. Had he spent the previous days consulting healers, reading texts, preparing for her needs? The child should be considered as well, offered a younger counselor, a woman with kind eyes. Once born, she will need everything, Fenris interrupted. And she will have it. I've already commissioned a nursery adjacent to the royal chambers. Vera stared at him. You've what? He met her eyes, and the vulnerability she glimpsed there stole her breath. I may have been proactive. The carpenters have been working since dawn. A nursery. He'd ordered a nursery built before they'd even spoken properly, before he knew anything about her beyond the fact that she'd collapsed at his gates. Because his wolf had recognized her. Because the bond demanded it. because he'd already decided that her daughter would be his. The wall behind Vera's ribs crumbled further, and she found she didn't have the strength, or the desire, to rebuild it. The council session dissolved into smaller conversations, counselors clustering in groups of 2 and 3, their voices a low murmur that washed over Vera like distant waves. She sat in her wheeled chair, still processing the surreal turn her life had taken. A nursery. He'd commissioned a nursery. Fenris crouched beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level, a gesture that shouldn't have meant so much, the Alpha King lowering himself to speak with her rather than towering above. "You're overwhelmed." It wasn't a question. She nodded anyway. The council will continue debating heating arrangements and vegetable availability for at least another hour. The corner of his mouth twitched. "I've given them a project. They're happiest when they have something to argue about that doesn't involve border disputes or execution orders." A startled laugh escaped her, weak and watery. "You're not what I expected." "No?" He tilted his head, something almost playful in the motion. "What did you expect?" "A monster," she thought. "A killer. A wolf so brutal that even my brother's lies seemed plausible when held up against your reputation." But she couldn't say that. Couldn't acknowledge how thoroughly the Thornwood pack had poisoned her understanding of the world beyond their borders. "Something colder," she said instead. "Something—" The great doors at the far end of the council chamber crashed open. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Fenris rose in a single fluid motion, placing himself between Vera and the entrance, and the rumble that built in his chest was nothing like the gentle sound she'd heard from him before. This was warning, pure and primal. A man strode through the doors, flanked by 2 guards who looked deeply uncomfortable with their charge. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that Vera knew as well as her own reflection. Better, perhaps. She'd spent her childhood studying that face, desperate for approval that never came. "Brother mine," Alexander said, spreading his arms wide as if expecting an embrace. His smile was the same one he'd worn while reading her death sentence. Warm, reasonable, hiding the blade beneath. Or should I say, brother-in-law? The ravens brought such interesting news. Vera's hands flew to her belly. Her daughter kicked against her palms, responding to the sudden flood of terror that crashed through her body like ice water. "No, no, no, no. You were not invited into this hall." Fenris's voice could have frozen the flames in the hearth. "Nor into my territory." "Ah, but I come as an ambassador." Alexander produced a scroll from his cloak, the wax seal bearing the Thornwood crest. "The pack has concerns, you see. Legitimate concerns about a traitor who fled before she could face justice, and who has apparently wormed her way into your confidence with—" Choose your next words very carefully. Gold bled fully into Fenris's irises, and the council members nearest him took instinctive steps backward. "You stand before your king. You speak of your king's mate. The latitude I might have extended to a genuine diplomat does not apply here." Alexander's smile didn't waver. If anything, it widened. "My apologies, Majesty. I meant no offense. I simply want to ensure you have all the relevant information before you commit to anything permanent." His gaze slid past Fenris to Vera, and something flickered there. Satisfaction, perhaps, at the way she'd pressed herself back against the chair. "Hello, little sister. You look well. Better than you should, given your condition. The Blood Moon hospitality must be exceptional. Do not speak to her." The command cracked through the air like a whip. Alexander's composure flickered for the first time, his wolf responding to the dominance in that voice despite his apparent confidence. "I bring evidence," he said, recovering quickly. Letters in her own hand detailing border patrol schedules, testimony from witnesses who saw her meeting with Blackwood scouts, a confession from a rogue who named her as their contact before he died. He held up the scroll. It's all documented, Majesty. I know you've formed an attachment. But surely justice must. The letters were written by your secretary. Vera's voice emerged stronger than she'd expected, though it shook at the edges. I recognized his penmanship. The witnesses are men who owe you gambling debts, and any rogue who confessed to naming me did so under torture that you ordered. She gripped the arms of her chair, forcing herself to meet Alexander's eyes. You sold those patrol schedules yourself, brother, to fund your ambitions after our parents died. I found the payments hidden in the accounts you thought no one reviewed. Silence. Alexander's mask slipped. Just for an instant, just a flash of the cold calculation beneath, before smoothing back into wounded concern. You see? He said to the council, shaking his head sadly. This is what she does. She twists everything, makes herself the victim. Our parents' deaths destroyed Her Majesty. She's not in her right mind. The pregnancy has only made her more unstable. Enough. Fenris moved so fast that Vera barely tracked it. One moment he stood before her chair. The next, he had Alexander pinned against the nearest pillar, one hand wrapped around his throat. You will not speak another word against her, Fenris said, soft and lethal. You will not look at her. You will not breathe in her direction. You are alive because killing an ambassador would create diplomatic complications I don't currently have patience for. But my patience has limits, Thornwood. Test them again and see what happens. He released Alexander with a slight push that sent the larger wolf stumbling. The guards caught him before he could fall. A small humiliation, but Vera saw the fury that blazed in her brother's eyes. I'll be petitioning for a formal hearing, Alexander said, straightening his cloak with deliberate care. The old laws require it when evidence of treason is presented. Even a king cannot refuse. The old laws also require that petitioners prove standing. Lord Garrett stepped forward, his earlier hostility toward Vera apparently transformed into distaste for the newcomer. You are no longer the Lady Vera's alpha. She claimed sanctuary under Blood Moon protection before your accusations were formally entered. Your standing is questionable. A technicality. Perhaps. Garrett's smile held no warmth. But technicalities are what keep civilized wolves from tearing each other's throats out in council chambers. You'll have your hearing, Thornwood, in 3 days' time. Until then, you'll remain in the guest quarters, under guard. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he inclined his head. As you wish, my lords. I only want justice served. His gaze found Vera's one final time, and the promise in it made her blood run cold. I'll see you at the hearing, little sister. The guards escorted him out. The doors closed behind them with a boom that echoed through the suddenly silent chamber. Vera realized she was shaking. The hours that followed passed in a blur. Fenris dismissed the council, delegated something to Lord Garrett about witness preparation, and personally wheeled Vera back to her chambers without speaking. His silence wasn't cold. She could feel the controlled fury radiating from him through their half-formed bond, but it left her alone with her spiraling thoughts. Alexander was here, in the fortress, sleeping under the same roof, breathing the same air close enough to... He cannot reach you. She startled. Fenris had stopped the chair beside the bed, and now he crouched before her again, his hand hovering near her cheek without quite touching. There are 6 guards posted outside your door. The servants who tend your chambers have been with my household for decades. Your food is prepared separately and tested before it reaches you. His voice was steady, factual, but his eyes, those impossible golden eyes, held something that looked almost like fear. I will not let him hurt you. You can't watch me every moment. I can. No hesitation. I will. If that's what it takes. She should have felt smothered. She should have felt the walls closing in, another powerful man making decisions about her life, her safety, her body. But what she felt instead was protected. Genuinely, truly protected. Why? The word slipped out before she could stop it. We've known each other for less than 2 days. You don't, you can't. I've searched for you for centuries. He said it simply, as if stating that the sky was blue or the moon would rise. 300 years of existing without understanding why my wolf refused to recognize anyone, watching lesser wolves find their mates, build families, experience something I thought my nature had stolen from me. His hand finally made contact, his palm cupping her cheek with devastating gentleness. You are the answer to 300 years of questions, Vera. I could not care less whether we've known each other 2 days or 2 decades. You are mine. The possessiveness should have frightened her. Coming from Alexander, from any wolf in her former pack, such a claim would have meant ownership, control, her identity subsumed into someone else's ambitions. But Fenris said mine the way other wolves said precious or irreplaceable. He said it like a vow, not a chain. Rest now, he said, rising. I'll be in the adjacent chamber preparing for the hearing. Call out if you need anything. I'll hear you. She caught his hand before he could turn away. Stay. He went very still. Please. She didn't know why she was asking, only that the thought of being alone made her chest ache. Just until I fall asleep. You don't have to. I don't expect. Vera. His voice was rough. If you ask me to stay, I will stay. I will sit in that chair and watch over you all night. But I need you to understand that my control has limits when you look at me like that. Like what? Like you're beginning to believe I might actually be worth trusting. She swallowed. Her wolf, dormant for so long, but now stirring with increasing frequency, pressed forward, urging her to close the distance between them, to bury her face against his chest and breathe in that scent of pine and winter wind. Stay, she said again. Please. He stayed. Vera woke screaming. The nightmare shattered as hands caught her shoulders, gentle hands, carefully calibrated not to bruise, and a voice cut through the terror. Not real, Vera. It's not real. You're safe. I have you. I have you. She gasped, choking on air, her heart slamming against her ribs hard enough that she thought it might crack through. The dream images still flickered behind her eyes. Alexander's face, his hands around her throat, her daughter's cries echoing from somewhere she couldn't reach. Tell me what you see. Fenris's voice, steady and grounding. Right now, in this room. What do you see? She blinked, forcing herself to focus. Firelight, the hearth, shadows on the ceiling. Good, what else? Silk sheets? Furs? The window? There's frost on the glass, making patterns. What do you hear? Her breathing began to slow. The fire crackling. Wind outside. Your voice. What do you smell? She inhaled shakily. Pine. Winter wind. Something warm and masculine underneath. You. Good. He released her shoulders but didn't pull away, settling beside her on the bed with his back against the headboard. Close enough to touch if she wanted, far enough that she didn't feel trapped. The nightmares will come for a while. You've been through something terrible, and your mind needs to process it. Did you? She swallowed. Did you have nightmares? After I killed my father? He said it without flinching. Yes, for decades. I dreamed of his face, of the moment his eyes went dark, of all the things he'd done that made his death necessary and all the ways I'd become like him by ending his life. You're nothing like him. You don't know that. I know you've had countless opportunities to hurt me. She shifted, just slightly, so her shoulder pressed against his arm. You've taken none of them. You argue with your counsel about vegetables and heating arrangements. You had a nursery built before we'd exchanged 10 words. A small, broken laugh escaped her. Whatever your father was, you're not him. Fenris was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had roughened. My father believed mates were weaknesses to be exploited. He killed my mother when I was young, claimed it was an accident, a failed childbirth. But we all knew the truth. He used the bond to control her, to break her, and when she tried to run, he stopped, drew a breath. I swore I would never take a mate, never give anyone that kind of power over me, and more importantly, never hold that kind of power over someone else. When centuries passed and my wolf recognized no one, I thought perhaps the goddess had answered my prayers. His laugh held no humor. And then you collapsed at my gates, 7 months pregnant and half dead from exhaustion, and my wolf nearly tore through my skin trying to reach you. Were you angry? Terrified? He met her eyes in the firelight. I am still terrified. I don't know how to be what you need. I only know that I would burn this kingdom to ash before I let anyone harm you or your daughter. Vera reached up, her fingers trembling, and traced the silver scar that bisected his eyebrow and continued down his cheek. He shuddered at the contact, but didn't pull away. You're already what I need, she said softly. You're already... A howl split the night. Then another, and another, a cascade of alarm calls that meant only one thing: intruders. Fenris was off the bed and at the window before the last howl faded. What he saw made his entire body go rigid, gold flooding his eyes as a snarl ripped from his throat. What is it? Vera struggled to sit up. What's happening? Fire. The word came out guttural, barely human. In the eastern wing, near the servant quarters, and the nursery. The nursery he'd built for her daughter. Vera, stay here, the guards will... No. She threw the covers aside, her legs trembling but holding as she forced herself upright. No, I'm coming with you. You can barely walk. Then carry me. Her voice cracked, but her eyes held steady. I'm not hiding in this room while my child's nursery burns and people die because my brother decided to send a message. Carry me, Fenris. He hesitated only a moment before sweeping her into his arms. They ran toward the flames. The eastern wing blazed against the night sky, flames licking from windows and sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. Vera clung to Fenris's neck as he ran, his massive body eating up the distance with inhuman speed, and she could feel his wolf pressing against his skin, not with rage, but with cold, calculated fury. Servants streamed past them in the opposite direction, some carrying buckets, others supporting the injured. The air grew thick with smoke, and Vera buried her face against Fenris's shoulder, breathing through the fabric of his shirt. The nursery, she gasped. Is anyone? The carpenters finished for the night hours ago. No one should be inside. But his voice was tight, and she knew he was thinking the same thing she was. This fire hadn't started by accident. Not in the wing where her daughter's room was being built. Not on the same night Alexander had been confined to his quarters. They rounded a corner and stopped. The corridor ahead was an inferno, flames crawling up tapestries and devouring ancient wooden beams. But that wasn't what made Fenris go rigid in her arms. Alexander stood at the far end of the hallway, silhouetted against the blaze. 6 of Fenris's guards lay crumpled at his feet. Not dead, she realized with sick relief, but unconscious, their bodies bearing the telltale marks of a sedative dart. Her brother had always been clever with poisons. Hello, little sister. Alexander's voice carried over the roar of flames, smooth and pleasant, as if they were meeting for afternoon tea. I have to admit, I'm impressed you made it this far. I really thought you'd die in the forest. Fenris set her down carefully, keeping his body between her and her brother. A growl built in his chest, low and deadly. You're supposed to be under guard. Your guards are remarkably susceptible to a pretty serving girl with drugged wine. Alexander stepped forward, and firelight caught the blade in his hand, silver, gleaming, wickedly sharp. Did you really think I came all this way just to plead my case to your council? I came to finish what I started. You'll die before you touch her. Perhaps. Alexander's smile didn't waver. But you'll have to choose, won't you? Save the wolves trapped in the burning wing or protect your precious mate. I've counted at least a dozen heartbeats in there, Alpha King. Servants who couldn't escape in time. Children. Vera felt the moment Fenris's resolve cracked. His whole body strained toward the burning wing, toward the lives that needed saving, but his hand remained locked around hers, his wolf howling at the thought of leaving her unprotected. Go, she said. I won't leave you with him. Fenris. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Gold swirled in his eyes, desperate and torn. There are children in there. Go, I can handle my brother. Vera. I survived 3 weeks alone in the wilderness while 7 months pregnant. She pressed her forehead to his, just for a moment. I can survive 10 minutes with Alexander. Trust me. The word hit him like a physical blow. Trust. She was asking him to trust her, to believe she could protect herself, to let her stand on her own. He kissed her, hard and fast, more promise than passion. And then he was gone, his massive form disappearing into the flames. Alexander laughed. Touching. Truly. But did you really think I'd let you manipulate the most powerful wolf in the north? You, who couldn't even hold a proper shift? You, who let a traitor's bastard take root in your belly? His name was Eden. Vera's voice came out steadier than she'd expected. He was kind and gentle, and he would have made a wonderful father. You don't get to speak about him. I don't care about him. Alexander moved closer, the silver blade catching light. I care about the embarrassment you've caused me, the plans you've disrupted. Do you have any idea how long I spent cultivating those council alliances? How many gold pieces I invested in ensuring our pack's dominance? And then you had to go and collapse at the Alpha King's gates like some pathetic stray. You sold our pack's secrets. The words burned in her throat, but she forced them out. The patrol schedules, the defensive positions. You sold them to the Blackwood rogues, not me. Alexander's smile flickered. Who told you that? No one had to tell me. I managed the pack correspondence for 3 years, Alexander. I know every noble's handwriting better than my own. Those forged letters? They were written by your secretary. And the payments? You hid them in the household accounts, but you weren't clever enough to disguise the amounts. They matched exactly with the information leaks. Speculation. You have no proof. Vera's hand went to the pocket of her nightgown, the letters she'd sewn into the hem weeks ago, transferred to safer keeping once she'd arrived at Blood Moon. Her fingers closed around the folded papers. Don't I? For the first time, genuine alarm crossed her brother's face. You're bluffing. 3 letters in your secretary's hand detailing patrol movements and payment arrangements. Your signature on the receipts. The confession you forced from that captured rogue. I found the healer's notes describing the drugs you used to make him compliant. She pulled the papers free, holding them up so he could see. I've been carrying your destruction since the night you sentenced me to death, brother. I just needed to survive long enough to use it. Alexander lunged, not for her, for the papers. His hand closed on her wrist, wrenching brutally, and Vera cried out as pain shot up her arm. The letters scattered across the stone floor. You stupid girl. His face was inches from hers, twisted with rage. You should have died in the forest. You should have frozen in the mud like the worthless creature you are. Instead, you've forced me to get my hands dirty. The silver blade pressed against her throat. Vera's wolf, dormant for so long, exhausted and weak, pressed forward. Not with strength she didn't have, but with clarity, with focus. She'd spent her whole life believing she was weak. Too small to shift properly, too soft to fight, too gentle for a wolf's world. But she'd survived 21 days alone. She'd protected her daughter through starvation and storms. She'd walked into the Alpha King's domain and found her mate. She wasn't weak. She'd just been waiting. "You forgot something," she said softly. "What?" "I'm not alone anymore." She grabbed the iron candlestick from the wall sconce beside her, heavy, wrought iron, wickedly pointed, and drove it into her brother's shoulder with every ounce of strength she possessed. Alexander screamed. The blade clattered from his grip as he staggered backward, clutching the wound, and Vera didn't hesitate. She dropped to the floor, gathering the scattered letters with shaking hands, and ran. Not toward Fenris, toward the Great Hall, toward the council members who would be gathering to respond to the fire, toward witnesses. Her legs trembled with every step. Her daughter kicked frantically, sensing her distress. The smoke burned her lungs, and the heat made her skin feel tight and fevered. But she kept moving, kept clutching those papers like the lifeline they were. She burst into the great hall just as the council convened. "Lady Vera!" Lord Garrett rose from his seat, his gray beard singed from firefighting efforts. "What?" "Alexander started the fire." Her voice rang through the chamber, stronger than she'd ever heard it. "He drugged the guards, he tried to kill me, and these—" She thrust the letters forward. "These prove that he sold our pack's secrets to the Blackwood rogues and framed me for his own treason." Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Then the doors behind her exploded open. Alexander stood there, blood streaming from his shoulder, the silver blade still clutched in his remaining functional hand. His eyes had gone wild, all pretense of civility stripped away. "She's lying," he snarled. "She attacked me. She started the fire to cover her escape." "Enough." Fenris's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. He emerged from the smoke-filled corridor, soot-streaked and furious, 2 small children cradled in his arms. He passed them carefully to a waiting servant before turning to face Alexander with eyes that blazed pure gold. "The children are safe," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. 8 servants pulled from the flames, 3 with burns, but none life-threatening. He stepped forward, and Alexander took an involuntary step back. "And I found this in the eastern wing." He held up a small metal container, the kind used to carry accelerants. "Your scent is all over it." "That proves nothing." "I am 300 years old." Fenris's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but every wolf in the chamber heard it. "I have ruled these lands since before your grandfather was born. Did you really think you could deceive me? That you could threaten my mate, burn my home, endanger the lives of my people, and walk away?" Alexander's composure shattered. He lunged, not for Fenris, but for Vera. The blade aimed at her throat. Fenris intercepted him before he'd taken 2 steps. The crack of impact echoed through the hall as Fenris's hand closed around Alexander's wrist, bones grinding audibly. The blade clattered to the floor. Then Fenris had him pinned, claws extended, pressed against the stone with enough force to crack the ancient tiles. "You would kill your pregnant sister for gold?" The words came out guttural, barely human. "Your own blood?" Alexander spat in his face. "She was always weak. Should have died with our parents. They coddled her, protected her, while I did all the real work. She's nothing but a burden, a failure of breeding." "Stop." Vera's voice silenced him. She walked forward, her steps steadier now, until she stood directly over her brother's prone form. The council watched in absolute silence. Fenris looked up at her, and in his golden eyes she saw the question. What do you want? Not what he wanted. Not what would satisfy his rage. What she wanted. She'd spent her whole life letting others make decisions for her. Alexander had counted on that, had built his entire scheme around her passivity, her gentleness, her inability to fight back. He'd been wrong. "I name you Oathbreaker, Alexander Thornwood." Her voice rang clear and cold through the great hall. Before these witnesses, I invoke the old laws. You have betrayed your pack, murdered truth with falsehood, and attempted to kill one under the Alpha King's protection. The sentence is mine to declare. Alexander's face went white. You can't. You have no authority. She is my mate. Fenris's voice rumbled beneath hers. She speaks with my voice. The old laws are clear. Vera looked down at the man who had once been her brother, who had held her hand at their parents' funeral, who had read her stories when she was small and afraid of the dark. She felt the weight of that history pressing down on her, the temptation to show mercy. Then she remembered his face as he'd read her death sentence, the satisfaction in his eyes, the way he'd called her daughter an abomination. Exile to the wastelands, she declared. Let him live with what he is. Strip him of pack bonds. Strip him of name. Strip him of everything he valued more than family. He wanted power so badly. Let him find it alone. Fenris looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. You heard your Luna, he said to the guards who had gathered at the hall's entrance. Take him, tonight. He doesn't see sunrise within these walls. They dragged Alexander away screaming, not for mercy, but hurling curses and threats that echoed through the corridors until they faded to nothing. Vera stood in the sudden silence, the weight of what she'd done settling into her bones. Then Fenris was there, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against his chest with infinite gentleness. You're shaking. I just sentenced my brother to a fate worse than death. You showed more mercy than he deserved. His hand came up to cradle her head, pressing her face against his shoulder. He would have killed you without hesitation, would have killed our daughter. You gave him a chance to survive. Our daughter. The words hit her like a wave of warmth. He'd claimed her child. Not as a political necessity, not as part of some strategic arrangement, but as his own. Take me somewhere quiet, she whispered. Please, I know. He swept her into his arms. I know exactly what you need. The moon hung full and heavy outside the windows of Fenris's chambers when they finally stopped moving. The fire had been contained. The injured were being treated. The council had dispersed, each member carrying copies of the letters that proved Alexander's treachery. Tomorrow there would be formal proceedings, official declarations, the tedious machinery of justice. Tonight, there was only this, only them. Fenris set her down on the edge of his bed, a massive thing carved from dark wood and draped in furs, and knelt before her. His hands came up to cup her face, his touch impossibly gentle for such large hands. You were magnificent, he said quietly, standing before them like a queen, speaking justice like it was your birthright. I was terrified. I know. I felt it through the bond. His thumb traced her cheekbone. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. The bond pulsed between them, warm and golden, but incomplete, unfinished. She could feel the places where it wanted to grow, to deepen, to become something unbreakable. Fenris. Yes? I want. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. Gold swirled through dark irises, patient and hungry and infinitely tender. I want to complete the bond. Tonight. I want to be yours. Truly. I want everyone to know. His breath caught. Vera, you've been through so much. If you need time, I've had 3 weeks of running and hiding and being alone. She reached up, threading her fingers through his dark hair. I've had a lifetime of being told I was too weak, too gentle, too soft. But I'm not. I know that now. And I know what I want. What do you want? You. The word came out steady, certain. I want you. I want this bond sealed. I want to wake up tomorrow, knowing that nothing can break what we have. I want my daughter to grow up with a father who argues with councils about vegetables and makes ridiculous faces at babies. She pulled him closer until their foreheads touched. I want home, Fenris. I want you to be my home. A sound escaped him, something between a growl and a prayer, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like their first desperate collision. This was deliberate, thorough. His lips moved against hers with a patient intensity that made heat pool low in her belly, his tongue tracing the seam of her mouth until she opened for him. She tasted winter wind and something darker, something ancient and possessive and utterly hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes had gone full gold. I need to hear you say it, he rasped, clear and certain. Are you sure? I'm sure. She tilted her head, baring the curve of her neck. Mark me, Fenris. Make me yours. He growled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through her bones, and lowered his head. His lips traced the line of her throat first, gentle and reverent. She felt his breath against her skin, hot and uneven, and then his tongue swept across the junction where her neck met her shoulder. The sensitive flesh sparked with sensation, making her gasp. This will hurt, he murmured against her skin. Only for a moment. I trust you. His teeth pierced her flesh. Pain blazed through her, sharp and bright and overwhelming, and she cried out, her hands fisting in his hair. But even as the pain crested, it began to transform. Heat flooded through her veins, liquid gold spreading from the bite and radiating outward until every nerve ending sang with it. The bond exploded open. She felt him. Felt 3 centuries of loneliness and longing, of watching others find what he'd believed he could never have. Felt his desperation when he'd carried her in from the cold, his terror that she might die before he could know her. Felt his wonder when she'd defended him to the council, his pride when she'd stood before them tonight and spoken justice. Felt his love, vast and fierce and absolute, wrapping around her like the warmest embrace she'd ever known. His mouth gentled on her neck, tongue sweeping across the wound as it began to heal, leaving behind a perfect crescent of teeth marks that would never fade. His mark. His claim. But she wasn't finished. She pulled him up, her hands shaking but determined, and guided his head to the side. The vulnerable column of his throat stretched before her, and she felt his pulse hammering beneath his skin. My turn, she whispered. His whole body shuddered. Vera, she bit down. His blood flooded her mouth, rich and wild and tasting of power, and she felt his wolf rise to meet hers in a howl of recognition. Through the bond came a surge of sensation so intense she couldn't separate his feelings from her own. Pleasure and pain and belonging and home, all of it tangled together until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. When she finally released him, they were both trembling. Mine. She breathed against his throat, tasting his blood on her lips. Yours, he answered, his voice wrecked. Always yours. Mate. The words settled between them like a sacred vow. They held each other in the silver moonlight, breathing together, feeling the bond pulse and settle into something permanent. For the first time in her life, Vera's wolf fell completely, utterly silent, not from exhaustion, but from peace. The coronation took place 3 days later. Vera stood before the assembled court in a gown of deep blue velvet, her mark proudly visible above the neckline. Fenris stood beside her, his own mark on display, his hand steady on her back as the crown settled onto her brow. Luna Queen, Lord Garrett announced, and the words rolled through the hall like thunder. Vera Bloodmoon, bonded mate to Alpha King Fenris, protector of the northern Pax, mother of the future heir. The court bowed as one. Afterward, there was feasting and dancing and more politics than Vera cared to follow. But she noticed things. The silver-haired councilwoman smiling warmly at her across the room, the younger counselor with kind eyes helping to manage the crowds around the refreshment tables, Lord Garrett himself raising a toast to the king's blessed fortune. Things had changed. She had changed them. 2 months later, their daughter arrived. Vera lay in the birthing bed, exhausted but triumphant, with a red-faced, furiously wailing infant in her arms. Fenris perched on the bed beside her, his expression caught somewhere between terror and wonder. "She has your nose," he said, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek with one careful finger. "And your determination." "She has her father's lungs." Vera smiled down at her daughter. Eden would have loved her. Fenris's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I'll tell her about him. When she's older. I want her to know she was loved before she was born." The council meeting the following week devolved into chaos within 10 minutes. "The nursery temperature is 2 degrees below optimal," Lord Garrett declared, waving a sheaf of papers. "I've consulted 3 separate texts on infant care. The napping schedule is the more pressing issue," the silver-haired councilwoman interrupted. "If she's not sleeping enough during the day, her development could suffer. With respect, the feeding schedule should take priority." Fenris sat in his throne, their daughter cradled in his massive arms, making the most ridiculous faces Vera had ever seen. The baby gurgled and waved her tiny fists, apparently delighted by her father's performance. The most feared Alpha King in 3 centuries, the wolf who had killed his own father, united the northern packs and ruled for 300 years, making silly faces at an infant while his council argued about napping schedules. Vera watched from her seat beside the throne, her wolf humming with contentment in her chest. The mate bond pulsed between her and Fenris, warm, settled, unshakable. Outside, the first snow of winter drifted past the windows. This was home. This was forever.